Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle, and as you can see, we're in Mario's office today because he is my special guest.
That's right.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on with me. I think this is going to be a really great episode.
Totally, yeah. This episode has roots.
It does, no pun intended, but kind of. The pun is intended.
Definitely. So we've been talking about this, subject for a number of years now, and it seems like it always kind of comes up for us. So we figured might as well do a show about it.
Yeah, and for people who don't know Mario, Mario is my fiance. He's a symbologist. He's a graphic designer. He's a tarot reader. He's a man of many talents. And, that's one of the reasons why he's here today. But he has been coming across some really interesting things that he's been connecting to the three healing traditions and the three symbolic traditions.
Correct, yes.
Now, as you said, the three healing traditions has been something that we've talked about and known about for a long time now, right?
Right, yep.
And so Mario was then coming to me with these findings, these inspirations, and these uncoverings of the three symbolic traditions. And, over the course of a couple conversations, we're kind of like, wow, I think this links up with the three healing traditions.
Right. It seems like there's a correspondence that can be made. And this is like what's been on my mind recently. And so I've been wanting to talk about it in general. And I think sometime last week we had a really good conversation about it.
Yes.
And so we thought that it was a good idea just to put it out there. And also, too, just have a conversation about it and see what other people think. See if there's any other connections that could be made. See if other people think it's helpful. Because every single time we've also ever brought this up to somebody, I feel as though it helps them understand kind of like the climate that we're currently in, the world we currently live in. And the same thing with the symbolic tradition. I feel like once I figured out the three symbolic traditions, thanks to a lot of awesome authors and researchers and stuff like that, it's really helped me kind of contextualize, the world we live in and the predominant symbolism of the day, and obviously there's kind of like the mainstream way of looking at health and healing.
Right.
And this isn't how it's always been, obviously. So it's like, what are the attributes of, the modern health system? What does it look like? How does it look at the body? And then what are the previous traditions? And how did it look at the body? And, what are the solutions and healing modalities there? So,
right.
Yeah, I'm stoked to get into it.
Yeah, me too. And it's actually really, just as we've prepared for this or in our conversations, it's helped me to understand the healing traditions more or see this correlation, see this crossover. And once you really put this together, you kind of can't not see it. It's like so many other things. You can't unsee these correspondences once you lay them out on paper and you're like, oh, wow, okay. This is actually really connected, more so than you see talked about, commonly.
Definitely. And that was one of the things actually kind of related with Susan Weed that I was really impressed with is the fact that she looked at these three healing traditions and she has symbolic correspondences with each one. And being a symbologist, I was really attracted to that. And I felt like it gave me just more awareness of who she is, how she looks at the world, how she's breaking things down. And I just thought it was really interesting that she put together a correspondence sheet that we'll be talking about here in a bit. And it just spoke to me because that's how I think of things in terms of just, basic symbolic frameworks, I suppose. And so I thought that said a lot about, who she is and what other kind of work she's done. She incorporates symbolism into her worldview and everything else.
Yeah.
And I think for a healer, I think you want that.
Yes, that is a very well-rounded, usually more grounded person that you'll be able to work with who understands symbolism and
Right.
what it means, even like symbolically, emotionally, what do your emotions symbolically mean for you and the world and how you present yourself in the world and all that stuff. Now, before we get into the origin of how we found this, I first want you to be able to introduce yourself a little bit, tell people where they can find you, everything else, and then we'll keep rolling into everything.
Yeah, definitely. So if you guys are unfamiliar with my work, you can find all of my stuff at symbolicstudies.com. And I've been posting content for 2 or 3 years now. I generally post content based on the astrological sign that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
I usually follow the tropical system in terms of posting stuff. I'm open to all the systems, really. And so right now, I just recently posted a video that has to do with Sagittarius. It's called Sagittarius and the Way of the Bow. And what I'm doing nowadays is I'm reposting content from years past. And it's actually been very nice. And what I'm doing is I'm re-editing parts of the video that need to be, I think, updated, perhaps, and tweaking things a bit, reposting them. People seem to be liking that. And then I'm also, I'm always doing interviews with people and stuff like that. I offer tarot readings. But yeah, symbolicstudies.com is how people can find me.
Yep.
And you've been very supportive with my symbolic journey. You were around before I even had anything like this going on. So you've really seen it kind of like grow, from the very, very beginning. And I still feel like it's like, I feel like I'm in the humble beginning stages still, obviously, but you've been around for the whole thing.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bob. And same to you with my herbal journey. You
you
knew me before that was an inkling
totally
of thought in my mind, and you kind of were in the same boat. You've watched me grow into an herbalist, and
I have, yeah.
I feel the same way. Feel like I'm still at the beginning stages, even though we both have experience on our back, but I just feel like these lines of study are multiple lifetimes of study.
Sure.
So I just feel like there's always something to learn. I'm always learning something. I'm always realizing where I could be better or where I could have, done something differently. And I think like that, we both have that in spades and we help each other.
Totally.
To see that. So
yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's a beautiful thing.
For sure.
So before we really jump into it, I want to say hello to everybody in the chat. What's up, everybody?
What's up, chat?
Hi, and thank you for being here. We got Keeper of the Lost Histories. Thanks for showing up. What's up, Petra? Good to see you. Jenny G is here. I might not flash all these because our internet's so slow that then it's like a slugfest. But we got Mercury Mel here. I see a Ben Balderson, Sarah G, Kabir's here. Third Eye Edify.
Very cool. Some fine folk in here.
Some great folk, as
Solid
always.
People.
Yep. We got Susan Weed. Susan W's here. Ani Ann and Jessness is here. As always, I just want to say thank you to all the patrons out there. You guys are awesome and are really just always bringing me and Mario a lot of abundance, and it really helps to keep the wheels spinning over here.
For sure.
Where is that one stuck on? All right, Jenny G. And my Cherie's here.
Hey, guys.
Always nice to see you guys.
Absolutely.
And before we do the slides, let's go back to the origin of finding out about the 3 healing traditions.
Totally. And that lies with you.
It does. And when I learned this, I immediately knew that Mario would want to know about it as well.
Right.
And it has to do with you as well, because we were actually at your friend's winter solstice party.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
In Eugene, Oregon.
Right.
And this was clear over a decade ago.
Yeah.
So I don't remember what year it was, but we can say it was definitely over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And I was standing in their living room looking at their books, and I saw this book. Can you see that? Healing Wise by Susan Weed. I saw this and I pulled it out of the bookshelf and I started thumbing through it. And one of the first pages I opened up to was her chart of the 3 healing traditions.
Mm.
And when I looked at this chart, and maybe should we pull it up now or should we wait?
Maybe in a few.
Okay. So when I looked at this chart, I was like, wait a second, there's 3 healing traditions. I've never heard of this before. And when I'm reading through the chart, she has the scientific tradition, the heroic tradition, and what she calls the wise woman tradition. Now, the wise woman tradition is like the oldest tradition of healing. She names it the wise woman tradition. She put her own spin on it, but it's based on the primordial healing tradition, which, preparing for this interview and this show, what came to me was just calling it the folk tradition, because that resonated with me. It made sense. Like, this is based in folk medicine, folk remedies. We're talking wise women and witches and men who were healers as well. All the people that were doing these folk remedies for their families and their communities, that's where this tradition is like based in. So we're going to reference it as either the wise woman tradition tonight or the folk tradition.
Right.
And so I read this chart, and the correspondences were just like blowing my mind because they resonated so deeply with me. So after that party, I immediately bought Healing Wise, and that was one of the first herbal books that I purchased, actually. So Susan Weed has been a pivotal teacher in my herbal journey on a lot of levels. And, she's a controversial figure in the herbal community, and that's one of the reasons why I was always attracted to her, because she isn't afraid to say certain things, even though I don't agree with everything she says. Typically, I really align with where she lies, with how she looks at health and healing, and it all comes down to nourishment, and that we're not dirty beings. There's nothing wrong with us when something happens.
Right.
We're here to heal, and when you have an ailment, it's an opportunity to further your studies about yourself and the world and the plant realms and all the things.
Right.
And so if you're new to this information and you're wanting to learn more, I highly recommend that book by her. And you can kind of like just get into it from there. And then towards the back of the book, she goes through like the main staple herbs that she works with, which are the common local weeds to her area, but most of North America.
Right. Yeah. The way she presents the information in terms of how these healing modalities look at the body, just like what you were saying. Like, the modern scientific tradition looks at the human body as a sort of machine.
Yes.
Right? Everything's kind of compartmentalized like a machine. There's nothing holistic about it. It seems like everything is really dissected to like a very fine degree. And so that's why you go to a hospital or you go through the system, and there's so many different types of doctors. But it kind of reminds me of the university system too, because that's where these people come from, in that all of the subjects are compartmentalized, and there's really not a holistic sort of view or approach to medicine. And I would say that was the first thing that, when I looked at the chart, kind of struck me of like, wow, that is kind of true. The scientific tradition, that makes sense that's the tradition that we're currently in. It makes sense that they would look at the human body as more mechanical, kind of more robotic. It's more of a dead sort of machine. And one of the bigger themes too with all of this is that there's no spiritual, emotional, psychological sort of framework here in the modern tradition. That's kind of just like swept to the side in a lot of ways, and that's not really addressed. Versus in the earliest tradition, the folk tradition or wise woman tradition, it seems as though things like narrative, things like what you're going through emotionally, spiritually, those all have a profound effect, and those are all more so taken into account.
Yes.
Which reminds me very much too of a sort of parallel conversation I think we're having at home with German New Medicine.
Yes.
And how German New Medicine is something that addresses these types of inner conflicts, your experience, things of that sort. And so to me, that's just a huge sort of thing to realize that like your inner life, your experience, the experience within, should be taken into account.
Yes.
Instead of it just being a completely separate sort of thing. So it seems like the modern world really kind of looks at humanity and humans in general as these meat suits, basically, and we're kind of treated like, I almost look at it like we're kind of treated like a car that's going in to get, repair work done. And so the way a car is kind of treated, you pull it in, and it's this very sort of like linear kind of way of looking at you, and they have protocols. That's another big thing. In the scientific tradition, it's all protocols. Nope, this is what we do here, without exception. And I find that all of this stuff really, as we know, you've talked to many people now on your show, a lot of these modern protocols aren't very helpful.
No, they're actually the opposite of helpful.
Right.
And typically, sorry, I don't mean to cut
Yeah,
you
no,
off.
you're
Keep
good.
going. They typically they're meant to suppress, as we've talked about so many times. And what also happens when you're going through Western medicine is that they're going to prescribe you medications that are harsh, and it might suppress your current symptom. But what might be happening is more damage, irreversible damage to certain organs and certain systems of your body that the prescription is doing while it's suppressing the symptom that you're taking the medication for, you know?
Yeah.
So you could take a medication for 20 some years, and at that 20-year mark, all of a sudden you have kidney problems.
Right.
Oh, well, turns out that medication can sometimes affect the kidney. Well, now you have to deal with the kidney issue on top of the issue that you were taking the pill for and
Right.
suppressing for all those years.
Right. And so
So it just becomes a slippery slope of mucky crap.
because you're not getting to the root of
Right,
anything.
right.
That's another thing that we'll be talking about. And the scientific modern tradition seems to be pretty obsessed with external solutions.
Yes.
All of the solutions are outside of self. And so oftentimes it comes in the form of a invasive surgery of some sort. It comes in the form of a pill or some sort of drug, you know, things like that, where the earlier traditions and the earliest tradition seemingly, obviously that wasn't the mindset. You know, it was more of a compassionate sort of way of looking at, you know, the human body and of, you know, just humanity in general, I would say. So there's a very cold sort of mechanical, sterile way that the modern Western medical system looks at humans, right? Which I think everyone probably watching this is well aware of.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing I'll say too is that, at least with like German New Medicine, you know, the idea is that nature doesn't make mistakes. In the scientific tradition, it seems as though they're pretty, you know, focused on the fact that nature only makes mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's what I see in the older traditions as well, is giving more reverence to nature, to the earth, to your relationship with the earth, to the plant kingdom, you know, all of these different types of things. And I tend to see things in that light, that nature doesn't make mistakes. But in the modern, you know, scientific tradition, they don't believe that. They're far from that truth, right?
Yeah, they really are. And the other thing that I love so much about the wise woman tradition or the folk tradition is that it's all based in nourishment. And nourishment can be the food you're eating, the herbal tea or infusion that you're drinking, and it's also the people and the things that you surround yourself with. Things can be nourishing, you know, on that deep level. When you know, we just had a group of friends over, you know, and how nourishing that was.
Yeah.
In my opinion, to my soul and my heart, to prepare to have them over, to create beautiful food together and drink and conversation. And that to me, like, it filled my cup. You know, it was like, wow, this is so nourishing on such a different level. And I think like that's where the older tradition really focuses its time, because that's why story medicine and conversation and all of that, sitting around the fire, the talking stick, that's why this is also important, because that's nourishment. You know, just talking about how you feel. You might not feel very well in the moment. A true healer is going to ask you questions that are going to lead you to find the answers as to why you don't feel better or why you don't feel good, as opposed to just giving you some solution to slap onto it right away.
Right. So the big theme here is that I feel like the scientific tradition continually, in all of its solutions, pull you away from self, pull you away from your center, pull you away from your spiritual sort of core, and always has you focusing on something outside of self, right? And so that's a major thing. And also, too, I would say that there's a pretty clear correspondence with the modern scientific tradition seemingly just being in the mindset that everything is scarce here. It's more of a scarcity sort of mindset with everything. In the earlier traditions, I would say with the wise woman tradition or the folk tradition, German New Medicine, and some of the doctors and healers that we appreciate that we've now met and know their work online, they seemingly see many solutions for
Yes.
any kind of problem.
Yes.
So there's multiple solutions in the earlier traditions. There's more of a focus on abundance and opportunity, ailments as opportunities. In the modern tradition, it's like the exact opposite, where everything is scarce. There's no solutions. You should probably panic. And, or the only solution is this one pill right here that we're going to charge you a lot of money for. And that's it. And there's no other solution. Sorry. We're not aware of any other way to heal your sort of problem or situation. So I think that that's a clear thing, the abundance versus scarcity kind of mindset with these two traditions.
Yeah,
right?
that's a really great point. Yeah, because that's crucial. I mean, in life, to be out of a scarcity mindset and in more of an abundant mindset.
Because the scarcity mindset is going to create more struggle and conflict and inner strife and
disease
disease, right?
Exactly.
100%.
It's 100% true. That's how it goes. And so
right on. Well, you want to show the chart here and just get into it, because there's a few sections that I think are worth reading that I kind of resonate with more. I don't think we have to go through everything.
No, but there are standouts for sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
So let's do that.
Cool.
All right, we're gonna pull up. We got a little slideshow for you guys. So here we go. There we go. So we can see this chart full form.
Excellent. So here are the three traditions according to Susan Weed.
Yes.
In her book Healing Wise.
Yes.
And so the first tradition you can see in that large column there, right underneath traditions, is the scientific tradition. And then that is preceded with the heroic tradition. And then the oldest tradition is the wise woman tradition. So what's the first thing that you would like to highlight here in terms of a row that you feel like really encapsulates what she's putting out there?
That's a great question. And the one that I always end up starting with is the place of power. So the place of power is towards the latter half of the chart. So the place of power in the scientific tradition is machine, tests, and drugs. In the heroic tradition, the place of power is within the healer. And in the wise woman tradition, the place of power is self. To me, that encapsulates so much and really, really shows you the significance of the wise woman or folk tradition and how important it really is. Because if a tradition is telling you your place of power is yourself, that's where you want to be. In my opinion, that's the tradition that you want to be in. And that's also the medicine person that you'd want to be working with. If they're the ones telling you that, no, this is about yourself. Yes, I will help you with these ailments or these questions or whatever, but to not rely on them to be your savior, or that they're going to be the thing that makes you feel better, because somebody can suggest all the best things in the world for you and none of them might work.
Right.
And it's not that the person suggesting it is wrong, or, I mean, people can be wrong, but you know what I mean? It's like, if you haven't addressed, though, the deep-seated things that's causing the ailment, and you're piling all the herbs and the supplements and the things on it, but nothing's happening, well, you may have to dig a little deeper. And that's where that place of power, I feel like, really comes into an importance.
That's a good one to begin with. The one, and obviously these are all completely related, but very much related to that, I really love what's on the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth row, the eighth line. The troubled one says. So this is very telling. I think she did a great job with a lot of these. And there's a couple of things that I maybe have like not issue with necessarily, but maybe I would frame it differently. But this one's fantastic. So the troubled one in the scientific tradition says, "It's beyond me. I want the expert to do it. Does that sound familiar?
Quite.
And then in the heroic tradition, the troubled one says, I've been bad and need someone to punish me. This is very interesting. And you've kind of been diving into this thread specifically over the last few days.
Yeah.
In regards to bloodletting.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you'll talk about that at some point.
Oh, we will.
And then the troubled one in the wise woman tradition says, I seek support so I can let go to my depths. Right? I think that's very, very interesting. And then related to this, too, the healer says in the scientific tradition, trust the test results. Obviously, that sounds very familiar. Versus in the heroic tradition, the healer says, I'll save you. Versus in the wise woman tradition, the healer says, I'll play with you in the sacred garden.
Right.
So very, very different mindsets, obviously, with all three of these. And so those are the two that I really wanted to highlight personally. I know there's other fantastic ones.
Yeah, there are really great ones. And I see people in the comments, they're checking out the chart too. So I'm glad you guys are looking at it. But like Jenny G is saying moon and blood is interesting. Someone else pointing out the moon and the blood connection, which we are going to talk about because that did stand out to both of us and always has. And there's a huge weave with blood and all three of these traditions that I really felt coming through when I was preparing for this. And
that's what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and we talked about it because there's a huge weave with that, and it's very potent and very interesting.
Right. So there's a few more lines that I want to go over. So
Sure.
In regards to disease and death, so this is the fourth row. In the scientific tradition, disease and death are the enemy. In the heroic tradition, they're the result of toxins. But in the wise woman tradition, they're natural allies for transformation.
Yeah, dude, some of this stuff gives me chills.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is amazing.
Right, yes. And yes, absolutely. Polymathing, could you post this image in the Telegram? 100%. So actually, what I'll do too is after the show, I'll upload this and put a link in the description.
Yeah.
On my channel. You could do the same, and then we'll post it in the Telegrams too.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Because this is one for the ages, man. This is like one that you want to like print out and put on your refrigerator or something, or give it to your nieces and nephews who might be of curious mind or something like that. Because there's so much to go off of here, and it really does spark good thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. So even just below that, the cure in the scientific tradition is to fix and fight. In the heroic tradition, it's to clean/punish. But in the wise woman tradition, it's to nourish.
Yeah,
nourish, right? The other one I have here, which I think is absolutely huge, is the characteristic. In the scientific tradition, it's visible. In the heroic tradition, it's the alternative. But in the wise woman tradition, it's invisible. And that is a point that I felt like I wanted to talk about too. And maybe with some of the other slides, I'll get into that more. But in the scientific tradition, things are way more, in a lot of ways, focused on what can be seen. So to me, I see the scientific tradition very much operating in the solarized world, in the world of light, sometimes I call it. And the wise woman tradition focuses perhaps on maybe what's unseen.
Yes.
So again, your emotions, generally unseen. What's happening with you spiritually, any kind of inner conflict, psychological conflict. These are quote unquote unseen things. And so in the scientific tradition, everything is always about what you can measure, what you can poke at with a stick, right? So everything has to be measurable. This is what people very much associate with the science. The scientific process. I think I'm mislabeling that. There's another name for it. But in science, that is held in like the highest regard, is being able to reproduce, experiments, being able to see the thing, to measure it, whether it's with a microscope or, something else. And in the wise woman tradition, there's more of a reverence for the unseen, which to me just relates to spirit. It relates to mystery,
right?
The mysteries, and all of these different types of things, which I think should be addressed. And this is more of a primordial concept, and it's more of a feminine concept as well, because the divine feminine symbolically is more passive than the masculine. The masculine is more projective, it's more out there, it's more visible. It's not unlike the sun, which is going to be something that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes.
Right.
So I think there's kind of an interesting correspondence with what's going on here and the three symbolic traditions that I've been kind of talking about as of late.
Yeah, it's huge. And, I want to say before we continue on, too, is like, I see and we see, I can't speak entirely for you, Mario, but, there is something to be said about getting like solid evidence of something working. That's not bad. It's not bad to want to see something from the start to finish, the whole process be completed and get validation that, okay, this is happening. This is what I'm seeing, whatever. Right. So we're not here to totally say that, no, never have something looked at or, whatever like that.
Even don't go to a hospital.
Right.
Things like that. So
if you need to and that's what you choose, it is what it is. But
I would say that all three of these traditions have valid modalities of healing.
Yes.
And that in a lot of ways that all three of these traditions currently exist, but predominantly, most people and most institutions practice the scientific tradition. And so I kind of look at it similarly to the symbolic traditions as well, in that they're all present in a way, but there's one tradition that seems to be really eclipsing the others. And just like with the symbolic tradition, it's true here where these traditions were built upon each other. So you can kind of see the clear transition between the three, right?
Yeah, and they really influence. You can really see, like, as I was preparing, you can see how, like, the wise woman or folk tradition influenced the heroic tradition. And then you can see how the heroic tradition really influences the scientific tradition. So just like everything in life, it's like things influence each other. We're in the age of influencers. So there's people that are freaking influencing people, and people are doing new things and they're making connections and blah, 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 blah. So it all kind of like rolls together in some weird way. But, we're really wanting to just pinpoint the differences between these, but then how they all really overlap, which is where we're going to get into next.
Well, actually, if you don't mind,
yeah,
there's a few down below in the visions of section that I want to highlight as well before we move on, just because I feel like it's so powerful. So as an example, the visions of the womb or of women in the scientific tradition is unstable.
Right.
Makes sense, right? In the previous tradition, in the heroic tradition, women or the womb were considered unclean. But in the previous tradition to that, the wise woman tradition, it's central to everything. The woman and the womb.
Yeah.
Right? Makes perfect sense. That's how I see things symbolically. The further back you go, this is the case symbolically as well. So what I've been referring to as the polar tradition or the stellar tradition very much highlights this exact same thing. That woman, the divine feminine, the crone, all of the aspects of woman, I'm thinking of like the virgin or maiden, the goddess, they were held in a higher sort of place the further back you go in time. Seemingly seems to be the case. And she's highlighting this here with how she views these three traditions. Similarly, she says in regards to the void, right? Visions of the void. In the scientific tradition, she says, avoid it. And then in the heroic tradition, it's the void will get you. And then in the wise woman tradition, the void is the source of all being.
Right.
Right. And so I find this to be true as well. And we might be using different words, but I see exactly what she's saying. And then in regards to birth, in the scientific tradition, birth is impossible. Right.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see how people view childbirth these days. And I was listening to a podcast, and these guys were talking about childbirth, and their impression of it was extraordinarily toxic and completely distorted from how it actually is. But that lines up perfectly with the scientific tradition that we currently live in, that birth is impossible. In the heroic tradition, she associates it with trauma. And then in the wise woman tradition, it's empowerment. So to me, that lines up as well. So hopefully with these, with the ones that we're highlighting here today, the
Right.
different correspondences, that everything here makes a bit of sense. I certainly think it does, and we've been looking at this chart here and there for like the last decade.
Yeah, and we reference it, quite often. We bring it up quite often, and I just want to point out too that you can see in the lower right-hand corner, she made this in 1989. So, I mean, Susan Weed, for anyone who isn't familiar with her, I mean, she is one of the pillars of the mainstream herbal community, I would call her, and she's still going strong. And so anyway, she's been thinking about this stuff for a long time. And so for her to bring it all together like this into a chart and influence people like myself and other people that I know and Mario, it's pretty cool. And it's pretty cool. It's kind of like a timeless chart, because she's going from what these traditions are like based in. Are there changes within these traditions throughout the years and the decades and centuries? Of course. But the basis of them, the root of them, it basically kind of like all stems from the same place. So it's really cool to see how this holds up and how it really still is pretty amazing and a really great way to lay it out for somebody.
Absolutely. And so obviously we have many more things to say, but I'm just realizing here, like, this is potentially several conversations.
I
right?
think so. Like, as we're talking about it, I'm like, I can already see a second, third, fourth episode coming from this. Because and I'm looking at, before we move on to the next topic, the symbols of each tradition. I think we could just say before we move on, but the symbol of the scientific tradition is the line or the monolith. Okay. Then the symbol for the heroic tradition is the circle. And then we have for the wise woman tradition, the spiral, which goes back to that infinity that we're talking about, that primordial energy, the void, the toroidal, going within. It never ends.
Right.
And there's some other stuff about the spiral that I'm very excited to talk about when we move into the wise woman tradition a little bit deeper, because it's very connected to a lot of the stuff that Mario is looking into and studying right now as well.
Yes, indeed. Right. So there you have it. Scientific tradition, heroic tradition, wise woman, and the folk tradition.
Yes. All right. So we're going to cruise past the chart one more time.
Yep.
And like we said, Mario and I will both post this in our telegrams for people who would like to have it.
Right. So in terms of symbolism, the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately has been how the world tree, first off, just continues to blow me away. And there are so many different things that I could say about the world tree. But the thing for today that we should focus on is the fact that, to me, the tree really can be broken down into three main parts. And the idea of dissecting something by three is fascinating. And if I'm not mistaken, Pythagoras said that anything you're dealing with can be broken down into three parts. So as an example, beginning, middle, and end would be like the best sort of quick representation of that, right? And the tree, I think, is very similar in that way. You can break it down into three parts. So the fact that Susan Weed broke down the healing traditions in three parts is interesting, right? It makes a lot of sense. So with the tree, you are dealing with three main parts. You're dealing with the branches up top, the trunk or stem in the middle, and then you're dealing with the roots down below. And to me, I feel like this has really helped me understand the three symbolic traditions that I've been researching. And it lines up perfectly with what I understand about these three traditions, and it lines up very nicely with the healing traditions as well. So it feels as though there's a clean correspondence here. And again, this is intended to be a conversation to help facilitate maybe further research or study or inquiry. And by no means, is this the end all be all of anything, but I do think it's very helpful. And so to me, what I see is that the upper portions of the tree, any tree that you see around you, really, but when I think of the tree, I think of a central tree or a world tree, right? But the world tree, its upper branches or an actual literal tree is more in line with the sun. So I put the sun glyph there. And then actually the trunk corresponds with the moon. And then I see the branches, the roots corresponding more so with Earth, but also with the stellar tradition or the polar tradition, the oldest symbolic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just to be very clear, real quick, I see that we perhaps are living in the solarized world. We live in a current solar tradition, which seems to have been preceded by a lunar tradition, which seems to have grown out of a stellar, polar, or northern sort of tradition, which is more in line with the roots, actually. And so when you look at a tree, the branches are what's exposed to the actual sun. It's the newest part of the tree, right? And so it's the most recent part of the tree. And so if you're going to, if you're just walking around the forest or a park and you're acknowledging flowers on a tree or the pine cones on a tree or the fruit or nuts of a tree, those parts of the tree, that's its newest part, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what is exposed to the sun. And so this is what most people are going to see when they're out and about, right? And so this connects very strongly with the solar tradition, the current solar tradition. It's what is most easily seen, right? Versus the roots are unseen, right? They're underneath the earth. So you don't really consider them as much as you consider or look at or think about the branches and the leaves and the flowers above, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very nice contrast between the root system of a plant or of a tree being its primordial aspect, its oldest aspect symbolically. A tree, in order to grow and thrive and produce these flowers and nuts and leaves and everything else, it has to have a strong root system. If it doesn't have a strong root system embedded in the earth, then the whole system is going to crumble or fall or die, right? So to me, it's very interesting. I see that the solarized nature of things really connects with the upper branches of the tree, and then the polar, stellar sort of side of things connects with the root side, right? So one thing that I feel like is a helpful tool, which I didn't include here, but I really see that there's 3 tarot cards that correspond with the 3 symbolic traditions as well. And that is the sun card, the moon card, and the star card. And it's interesting that in the sun card, you usually have a young boy or you have 2 young children, brothers or twins, right? But you have a child. You have a child on the sun card. To me, this makes sense as it lines up with the solar tradition because it's the most recent tradition. It's the newest tradition, right?
Right.
Right before the sun card, you have the moon card. The moon is all about travel, right? So generally you're and cycles and things like that. And so on the moon card, you're going to see twin pillars, you're going to see a gateway of sorts. So the moon really is very much related to travel and journeying and things like that. And right before the moon card, you have the star card. And what do you have on the star card? You have a nude woman preparing a ritual bath underneath the stars. This lines up with the stellar polar tradition, like very clearly, very strongly, right? And so to me, that's what I see. I see that the stellar tradition preceded the lunar tradition, which preceded the solar tradition. And I see that it lines up nicely with the 3 healing traditions. So to me, the scientific tradition in the solarized world, it makes sense that medicine would be imposed on us.
Right.
Right. It would make sense that it's kind of thrust upon us. And if you don't take this or take that, you're not going to get this job. You can't travel. It's our way or the highway. It's very tyrannical the way it's ran right now. Right.
Yeah.
And so I see that the scientific tradition, to me personally, I see that it really lines up with the solarized world. I see that it lines up with heliocentrism. And so the sun is the current focus of things, right? The sun, what can be seen, seems to be a lot of people's priority symbolically, that they see the sun as the end all be all kind of in the heavens or in the sky. But the sun, being as radiant as it is, it like demands your attention, right? And so it demands your attention because it is ever glorious. You know, it's glorious strong, right? And so when solar worship is kind of the main sort of philosophical or spiritual kind of outlook on things, what kind of suffers because of that? The feminine, the mother, woman, the crone, the earth itself.
Right.
And to me, there's a very clear distinction, or there's a very clear correspondence as well with what you're calling the folk tradition or wise woman tradition and literally the earth itself, which is why I use the glyph for the earth. It's debatable. This bottom glyph that it's associating here with the folk tradition, some people say it's a solar symbol. I see it as a earth symbol. I think it started off as an earth symbol. I also think the same thing with the sun glyph too up top, that started off as an earth symbol, so it's more of a polar symbol at its core. So the roots literally being embedded in the earth, strongly related to the earth. And the earth traditionally, I'm not saying all cultures viewed it this way, but the earth traditionally being related to the woman makes a lot of sense. We sow seeds into the ground. We put seeds into the earth, right? Virgo, I think, is a very good sort of example of a goddess or a deity or an archetypal sort of figure to bring up here, because Virgo is related to the heavens, the night sky. She's the queen of heaven, but she's also the queen of earth as well, right? And so Virgo symbolism, virgin symbolism, maiden symbolism very much is related to the earth and is very much related to the womb, right? And so to me, in the folk tradition, the wise woman tradition, it really has a nice correspondence with the earth itself and with root medicine, getting to the root of things. And also, in turn, not being afraid of the darkness.
Right.
And not being afraid of things that are hidden. Roots are hidden underneath the earth. And so it corresponds a lot with what she's saying here in terms of the void and in terms of the invisible. So once again, scientific tradition is the visible realm. The wise woman tradition, the characteristic of it is invisible. So I see that there is this kind of clear sort of dynamic here. Scientific tradition, visible, the roots above ground, the branches above ground.
Right.
And then the folk tradition, wise woman tradition, tapping into what some people might call the invisible, right? But you're dealing with the roots underneath the ground. So that's kind of my setup symbolically as it relates to these three traditions. There you go. So upper portion, I think, is very much solar. The stem or the trunk is lunar, which I'll get into on why that to me makes perfect sense. And then the roots would be more of a polar sort of dynamic.
Yeah.
And polar symbolism has a lot to do with the world axis or the axis mundi, which people who are familiar with my channel, this isn't the first time they've heard me talk about it. But the world axis is related to ancestry. It's related to tradition. It's related to your roots. It's related to stability. It's related to foundation. It's related to structure. All of these different types of things. To me, in the solar age, the modern scientific solar age, a lot of it has to do with transhumanism and technocracy. And so literally, if it's new, it's good.
Yeah.
There's always this kind of like in the modern world, there's this idea that new technology is just the best. That anything that is tied to tradition, is tied to ancestry, should be stomped out. And that's the devil, actually. So obviously, in the modern world, we're kind of encouraged to always change with the times, to adopt the new thing, the latest thing. We are not encouraged to kind of like tap in and maybe do any kind of ancestral work or look into our past. And I think that has a lot to do with what we're talking about here, is that the wise woman tradition connects us with our roots.
Right.
And I think that's a very dangerous thing for a lot of institutions and things like that. They don't want us connected to our roots, right? They only want us connected with the new thing, right? So in so many ways, the solar tradition relates to the child, the son, the newness. So son, SONSUN, right? With the baby, with the latest and greatest sort of thing. And I think that all of this really, what it does is it suppresses the feminine. It suppresses, the primordial mother or the dark feminine. So those are a few things off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Any comments or anything you want to share?
I mean, it's beautiful. It's just, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation online, because we've been talking about this for the last couple months now. And so it's like to see you be able to talk about it and put it out there. And it makes so much sense to me when we look at it from this perspective. And one of the things that came to my mind when you're talking about the roots and not being rooted is when you're not rooted, you're highly influenced. You can be influenced in a big way. So because you're wafting around, you don't know your roots, which kind of means you don't really know yourself, or you're unwilling to really tap into the roots of yourself or your history, which leaves you open. It leaves you open in vulnerable ways. Yeah. And I think that's why these institutions can really dig their claws in when they're taking us out of the more wise woman folk tradition, because if you're always relying on them or the outside, everything outside of you, then you're not actually going to be thinking about your roots, because you're going to be thinking about all the other crap that they're telling you to think about.
Right.
And so just something to throw into the pot there with
also
rootedness.
Just the way this realm sort of works. The bright thing will get your attention. The shiny thing will get your attention. There's so many distractions in the world of light, in my opinion, that you really need to be careful with what you drift towards, kind of what you adopt, what you're open to, because it reminds me of like a fish in a pond, and a lure that looks attractive. You don't know if there's actually hooks in that thing that you're attracted towards.
Right.
There could be ulterior motives to the thing that is getting your attention, basically. And right now, in this world too, your attention and your energy is like your currency, basically.
It's gold, baby.
It really is. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of fits with the solarized world too, in a lot of ways. And I'll explain a little bit more about what this whole lunar business is, why I think the lunar tradition fits very nicely with this trunk in the middle.
Yeah.
And so
let's do it.
So here we go, the moon. So to me, I see the moon, once again, being very much related to cycles and travel and journeying and things like that, which is why on the moon card, you're going to see that gateway once again, right? And so moon symbolism, right? I think of menstruation. I think of water, right? I think of the ocean. I think of, just the fact that humans, we go through our own sort of aging process, obviously. So we're born, we mature, and then obviously in our elder years, we start declining, in health and wellness and everything else. But this is the natural process. The moon itself is always changing, right? And so it's more of it's more in flux than the sun. The sun, obviously, it goes between the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. So you're going to see the sun at different parts of the year when it's colder and warmer. But the sun's radiance or brilliance is pretty much constant, right? Especially in comparison to the moon. The moon is always morphing and changing unto itself, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it's really interesting to me that the more I study the moon and the more I study Mercury, the more I see that they are, I don't know exactly the way to explain it just yet, but there is a tradition strongly linking the moon and Mercury together. And so when I think of the lunar tradition, I also think of Mercury very, very strongly. And so as an example, when you're dealing with Mercury or Hermes, the Egyptian equivalent, arguably, it's several gods, but the main Egyptian equivalent is Thoth or Thoth, mm-hmm. right? He was a moon god, right? So there's some depictions of Thoth as a monkey, which monkeys generally and apes are mercurial animals, right? And so that's kind of like a common correspondence that has been made over time. And so you will see Thoth as a monkey with a lunar headdress, or with a crescent moon on top of his head, just like this one right here, right? So that to me is like a very clear sort of correspondence there, right? So Thoth, Mercury, Hermes, the moon. Also, Mercury is known as Quicksilver. Well, the moon is related to silver as well, right? And the moon is, like I said earlier, related to water. Mercury very much is related to being a fluid sort of figure. There's a fluid nature to Mercury, and there's a watery nature to Mercury as well, I would say. So water, liquid, fluid, Quicksilver, lunacy.
Mercury poisoning, the Mad Hatter. You have that kind of same connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a number of examples that I will highlight at some point of all of the correspondences between Mercury and the moon, right? To where now I will look at something that's more of a lunar sort of symbol, or a mercurial symbol, and I see how much they interface with each other. So much so too, it's really interesting that the moon, our moon, and Mercury look very similar, actually. So much so that if you took a picture of Mercury and showed somebody that, a lot of people might mistake it for the moon. There's a lot of correspondence there as well, just literally between what these two planets actually look like. And normie mainstream scientists have even pointed this out too. It's like, what's going on here with this? Money is another thing. Mercury is well known for being like the deity that merchants and thieves and things like that kind of associate with. It's literally called money, moon eye, right? A lot of people are aware of that. Money, the MON of money goes back to the moon. A lot of words that are M blank N go back to the moon, but especially MON or something like mound, right? That goes back to the moon, lunar symbolism, basically. And so money has a lot of watery correspondences with it, right? So you put your money in a bank. It's called currency, just like a current. There's a million different examples. I'm definitely not the first person who has pointed this out, but I'm sure most people who are probably listening to this might be aware of some of those traits. But money relates both to lunar symbolism and mercurial symbolism, right? Mercury is the messenger of the gods, so it travels, right? I was just saying that the moon has a lot to do with cycles and with going through this gateway, which is why the moon card essentially is like a gateway card, right? The moon is also kind of the first step to getting to other planets on like an astral ascension sort of level, right? So the moon is considered the gateway out and also the gateway in. This relates to some of the symbolism I've talked about with the gateway of man being related to Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, which the card that corresponds with Cancer is the Chariot card, right? There are some Chariot cards that are very mercurial. Even Barbara Walker on her deck, she puts literally the glyph for Mercury on the Chariot itself, which I think is totally slick and I think makes a lot of sense. So here we are with a crescent moon, and all you have to do to really see the relationship with Mercury, in my opinion, or at least this is just another example, is just add the circle and the cross beneath it.
Right.
So we kind of can't forget that literally the glyph for Mercury has a crescent moon on it, right? And so this is all me building up to the idea that the lunar tradition corresponds with the trunk, right? So let's go back here. The trunk is how the whole tree is able to bridge the gap between heaven and earth, right? So all trees are symbolic bridges connecting the above and the below, but symbolically, esoterically, also separating the above and the below. And so to me, the lunar tradition is heavily tied to mercurial symbolism, and Mercury is known for being the messenger of the gods. And so it goes up and down the world tree. It goes up and down the stairway to heaven. It goes up and down the world axis to the different planes of reality. Mercury is a psychopomp, and so it's the guide of souls, right? And so it reminds me of the squirrel in Norse mythology.
Yep.
That goes up and down the trunk of Yggdrasil.
Yes.
Right. And so this is the correspondence. This is one of the mercurial correspondences. And so to line up the lunar tradition with the in-between tradition between solar and polar makes, to me, a lot of sense, because the lunar symbolism is more transitory. It's more of a flux and reflux sort of thing. It's more of a traveling, cyclical kind of thing. So it would make a lot of sense that lunar symbolism is in between the present tradition, the solarized world, the solar age, and the oldest tradition, which I call the polar age or the stellar tradition, right? There's a number of names for it.
Right.
But to me, lunar symbolism being in between makes a lot of sense. It also makes a lot of sense that Mercury, or the moon, relates to the heroic tradition, the tradition in between the modern tradition and the oldest tradition, because of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is related to symbolically travel, to symbolically going through trials and tribulations. Notice that all those things too start with a TR: travel, trial,
right,
tribulation. And so to me, the heroic tradition, this heroic age, lines up with lunar symbolism because of this journeying sort of concept, right? And so the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, as an example, has talked about this at length. But it's about going from A to Z. It's kind of the path of the fool, starting somewhere, going along this journey, and then finding out kind of like what you're really made out of, and really testing yourself and your mettle and all that kind of stuff. And so I see that lunar symbolism, mercurial symbolism, lines up with the heroic tradition that way too.
Right. Yeah. I see it very clearly after you brought this to the table. And I also see it in the correspondences with the heroic tradition and what the actual medicine is based on.
Right.
And the connection to the blood.
Yeah.
And as I said in the beginning of the show, what I realize is there's a really big weave with blood throughout all of these traditions.
Right.
As there is in life, blood is very important, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with the heroic tradition being related to the moon, there is a whole thing with what most people know about with heroic tradition is bloodletting. And when we came across this, most people know what bloodletting is, but it was an ancient, tradition or practice to drain someone of blood while they are ill. And the whole thought behind it was that it was going to shock the body back into health. And that's what a lot of the heroic tradition stuff is based on, is harsh treatments, lots using, even if they are using herbs, they're using very potent herbs and a lot at heavy doses. You're using them in capsules. You're taking a lot to get drug-like responses from an herb, which in my opinion, I don't think herbs are intended to be that way, even though they can be fast acting. I don't think that it's always about more is better. And the heroic tradition was kind of like that. But one of the things that was trippy about learning about the bloodletting is that it wasn't just done at random. It was the person's, their age was taken into account, which was then linked to the phase of the moon. And then they would link their ailment to to a specific zodiac sign, and then depending on where the ailment and the zodiac sign lined up, they would then choose the best time to do the bloodletting. So, I'm not promoting bloodletting by any means, but there was a science to it. They weren't just going to a person's house and, making the wound and letting them drain of blood. There was more of, they had some sort of system that was set up, that was connected to the moon.
Right. For what it's worth, right?
For what it's worth.
It's just
exactly.
To me, it's more of like a point of interest, right?
Totally. Yeah. That's
I do think that's fascinating.
It is kind of fascinating to think about it, but the blood moon kind of thing that runs through this is really interesting.
Right. Totally. So I'll just say this as well, just to kind of round out some of what I'm trying to present here, is that the scientific tradition is very masculine. The folk tradition is more feminine with how they view everything, seemingly. Now, the heroic tradition is the go-between. It's kind of the transitional tradition between the three major traditions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, just like Mercury, Mercury is known for being a divine androgyne. Mercury is both masculine and feminine. So, one of the symbols related to Mercury is the caduceus, right? So, you have the twin serpents going up that wand. And so it's an embodiment or a synthesis of the positive and the negative, of the masculine and the feminine, right? And so I think that that's what also makes sense with the lunar tradition, being the in-between tradition between these two major traditions, between the masculine and the feminine tradition. Also, because I haven't said it yet, the solar tradition, the luminary that's of supreme importance in the solar tradition is the sun. In the lunar tradition, it's obviously the moon.
Yeah.
But in the polar tradition, it's the pole star. It's the North Star. So when you find your most authentic self, if that's even possible, I think it's always this journey, this spiraling journey of getting closer and closer to the center. Do you actually achieve it? Are you actually there? Perhaps in fleeting moments. But I always feel like it's this something that you have to continually kind of work towards. It's this perpetual journey, right? It's almost like a labyrinth too.
Yes.
So you think you're getting closer to the center of the labyrinth, but then something changes, right? There's a new exit, or there's a new door, or there's a new wall, or something morphs within the labyrinth. And so you have to continually just journey and live life and do that kind of work. But when you are said to be on the right path, your authentic path, it's not uncommon for people to say that you've found your true north.
Right, yeah.
Or that you're following your guiding star. That is the pole star. And the reason why this glyph makes sense with the pole star and the northern polar stellar tradition is because it's the central star in the heavens. And the North Star corresponds, in my opinion, and surrounding constellations, the circumpolar constellations, the North Star corresponds with the primordial gods. The northern sky corresponds with the primordial gods. So these are the oldest of old deities, the ancient ones, some people might call them, or the old ones, right? The path of the sun is where we get our astrological signs from. It's known as the ecliptic. Depending on who you ask, there may have been as many as 88 constellations along the ecliptic at one point, perhaps to 13, the 13th being Ophiuchus, to 12, which most people acknowledge. 12 signs along the path of the ecliptic. And as old as these constellations are, and as old as these traditions are that acknowledge the constellations, they are a newer tier of deity. I'm pretty convinced of that at this point, that the signs along the path of the sun are a younger god. They're a younger deity, right? I would say that the planets, they're kind of classified as an older set of deities or an older set of gods, but I think the northern sky is the primordial god. And everything that I've done, all the research that I've done over the last handful of years, it continually points me in that direction of like, no, the real old gods are up here. And a lot of cultures believe this too. And so I'm just kind of like translating, some of my work for people.
Right.
So that's why this also makes sense, is because the solarized world, this is more of a newer tradition. It's not the end all be all. As much as I have so many books, modern books, that acknowledge the sun this way, but I see it that this is actually a newer sort of thing. But the further back you go, you're going to be dealing with more what I call, again, the polar tradition, stellar tradition. It was more about the fixed stars in the sky, but in particular, a lot of fixed stars in the northern sky, which is the hub of the wheel of heaven, essentially. So kind of like the folk tradition or the wise woman tradition, you're getting more to the core of things. You're bringing it back home, right? And there's a very clear correspondence too with the northern sky and people who had a reverence for it and also their reverence for the earth as well. So to me, the polar tradition, the stellar tradition, it's what people saw in the geocentric um, reality that people understood to live within. So the polar tradition interfaces with geocentrism, with more of a worship of Earth. Or not, I think worship is kind of a strong word, but I almost look at it as more of like a symbiotic sort of thing, you know. But there was more of an Earth-centric sort of perspective, and there was an attitude that the Earth provided, Mother Nature provides. You know, Mother Nature doesn't make mistakes, etc. In the solarized world, the focus is the sun, and the sun's always moving around, you know. But the Earth is always there. You're going to wake up tomorrow, more than likely, if you're lucky, and the Earth will still be there, and the North Star will perpetually, for the rest of your life, always be in the exact same spot. You can't say that about the sun.
Right.
So to me, I think of the sun as being like, you know, just imagine following it in your mind's eye. Your head has to be on a swivel, and you're constantly going like this. But the pole star is always stationary and idle, which is why it's referred to as an imperishable star. And so what I've also learned is that the North Star is very, and surrounding stars, very, very feminine. There's a lot of masculine symbolism tied to it. It's the throne of God, all these different types of things. But to me, the oldest sort of reflections or expressions of the North Star and the circumpolar constellations are more feminine in nature. So like Ursa Major, as an example, it's a mother bear. It's not just a great bear. It's a mother bear and her cub.
Right.
You know what I mean? So for all those reasons and more, I think this correspondence kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And the more you talk about it and the more we compare all of these things together, the stronger I feel about it, the stronger it resonates, really.
Right. And so Old World Micmac, what's up, is saying here, roots, underground / underworld, Milky Way. So yeah, that's another correspondence that I think is absolutely fascinating, is that when you get into stellar symbolism, you're dealing with, and I don't want to say too much because I want to work up to a presentation where I can be like very clear about this.
Okay.
But when you're looking in the night sky, you're looking at the spirit realm, and you are looking at the true root system here.
I love that. Yeah.
You know, so there is a direct correspondence. I think Virgo is a great way of explaining it, is that Virgo is the queen of heaven, of the stars. She's known as the stellar virgin or the stellar mother, which is why the Virgin Mary generally is associated with stars, either on her outfit, her robe, or whatever she's wearing, or some sort of crown or something like that. You'll see this with Virgo made in symbolism all day too, is that she will have a crown of stars or something along these lines, because she's the stellar virgin. And so again, Virgo relates to the queen of heaven, the stars. She's the stellar virgin, but she's also the queen of earth, right? Because there's a relationship there, that the true roots of this place are actually in the stars. You're looking at the oldest aspect, in my opinion, of this domain that we live within, you know. So there's a very strong relationship between earth symbolism, soil symbolism, root symbolism, and stellar symbolism. They're actually, believe it or not, way closer than what most people realize. And that's something that I've kind of been unpacking for myself over the last like handful of months, how closely aligned they are. So much so that they're kind of one and the same, actually, believe it or not.
Right.
You know, which is why the stars have been looked at as like a source of inspiration and wisdom for such a long time. It's because it's the oldest part of this realm, of this domain, you know, and same thing with the earth, you know. And so they've been fused together in so many different ways, which I'll get into in a presentation at some point.
Yeah, and that's going to be a banger. And, you know, it makes me think of, when you say that, it's just like an astrological chart, kind of. It's like when you look at your astrological chart, whether you can understand it's being said or you're going to somebody to have it translated for you, that is basically a snapshot of your roots. It's like your roots when you crossed over into this realm or something like that. So to me, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll also say too, it really seems as though you can kind of make a clear sort of distinction or correspondence with the solar scientific tradition, really being closely aligned with germ theory and viral theory.
Yeah.
And then the earliest tradition, folk medicine, wise woman tradition, being more in line with like German new medicine and terrain theory.
Yes.
Now, I know these are separate sort of schools of thought, but there is overlapping principles, in my opinion, between some of these things.
Yeah, there are.
And I think that people who maybe have looked into this a little bit will understand kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know, but it has more to do with your terrain, right? The wise woman tradition, your terrain, how you're nourishing your body, and what you're choosing to put in your body, what's happening within, including your thoughts, including your emotions, you know, all of these different types of things. Whereas in the modern world, in the scientific tradition, with germ theory and viral theory, it's external things that are invading your system, external things that are invading your body. This is heliocentrism for you. You know, geocentrism, a lot of geocentrists, myself included, you know, it seems as though we live in a more closed system than not, which is why we're taught the exact opposite in movies and school and everything else. So there's that nature too of an enclosed system having its own rhythms and needs and, you know, all of these different types of things versus an open system where something from the outside can literally come in and like a space invader, you know, infect your whole entire system and throw things off or whatever.
Yeah.
So again, scientific, solarized world, germ theory, viral theory, folk, wise woman tradition, more so terrain, German new medicine type of approach.
Yeah, definitely. It's a
Yeah.
good distinction to make sure we put out there.
Yeah. So there you go. So should we keep this up, or is there any slides that you want to look at right after this? Because we can bring it back too, obviously.
I mean, if you've got, did you get all your thoughts out on this, or?
I think for the most part, yeah.
Well, I don't remember what the next slide is.
Let's find out together.
Okay.
I think it's your stuff.
Oh, yeah, probably is. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to include just the image of the primordial goddess and the spiral and talk a little bit about the spiral and how the spiral is basically the symbol of the wise woman tradition for all the reasons that we're talking about. And so I think that this is such a really beautiful depiction. Most people have probably seen something like this, but how the goddess statues throughout time are usually depicted with spirals, with a curvy woman. She is making a moon with her arms, but she's also encapsulated by the moon. So kind of, again, just like this one in particular really drives home that spiraling kind of energy that is so important in life, and that is the basis of this folk wise woman tradition. And it kind of brings me to one of the points that Susan Weed makes about the spiral and the number 13. And we have been talking about the 13 quite a bit because Mario has been making some really great connections with the number 13. 13 is near and dear to my heart because I was born on a Friday the 13th. So there's some deep connection there. And anyone who's done any research on the alternative thoughts on the number 13 in the mainstream, we're told it's an unlucky number. But when you really look into this stuff, the 13 is all connected to the great mother, the primordial mother, the existence that is happening here is the 13. And 13 in the spiral. And I'm going to quote Susan Weed here because when I read this, I'm like, dude, this is perfect. And it's exactly in line with where we're kind of going today. So she says, this is Susan Weed's words, walk a spiral, you will inevitably come to the unique next step, the unknown, the 13th step, the opportunity for change, the window of transformation. The 13th step creates the spiral. And to continue... The 13th step creates the spiral. 12 is the number of established order. 12 is easily divided and ordered into halves and quarters and thirds, easily categorized and labeled and defined. One step beyond the mutable 12 is 13, the wild card, the unique number, the invisible prime 13, the number of change. I love that. That honestly, that is one of my favorite sections of this whole entire book is this right here. And the number of change and how important it is to acknowledge change, and how we all know that change is constant. It's the only constant. It is the thing that keeps us going. It is the reason the spiral is so important, and it is the reason why the void is so important. And that the void is one of the biggest parts of a true healing journey, is being able to acknowledge this and go into the void, and to acknowledge that things have to change and things will change. And if things aren't changing, that in and of itself will create problems that can turn into conflicts. Yep. And can turn into disease, and can turn into all these things that we're talking about. And so just really wanted to take some time and focus on this image and this spiral in general, and love to hear obviously what you have to say about it as well.
Yeah. I mean, pretty powerful, really.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's an amazing sort of correspondence that you would bring up too, and the fact that she brought it up, I think is really, really cool, because 12 is a solar number.
Right.
Right. And so 12 disciples of Christ, 12 signs in the zodiac, a 24-hour day divisible by 12 two times. 12 is a solar number through and through. And that's just what it is. People, this is like commonly acknowledged, right? The 13 is breaking out of, in my opinion, the solar cycle. Some people have said it's breaking out of the solar matrix, right? The 13 relates to death. Death is the only card, the 13th card of the major arcana. Death is the only card in traditional tarot decks that does not have a name on it. So it'll say temperance and, everything else, the magician or whatever. It does not say death. Death will oftentimes be unprinted without a name. And the idea was that apparently a lot of cultures have this concept that if you say death's name, you are invoking it, right? Which is very interesting. And so it's best not to even mention death, according to some of these people. Otherwise, he's going to come for a visit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in actuality, death is a gift. Death is the other side of birth. Death is the other side of rebirth. In actuality, with the solar, or excuse me, in the wise woman tradition or the folk tradition, or dare I say the esoteric tradition.
Oh, there you go. I like that too.
Death is actually held in a very high regard. Death should be understood. Death should not be feared. Death should be integrated. To me, this is the difference between, the right-hand path and the left-hand path. It's not that simple, because I think that with the right-hand path, there's a positive and a negative right-hand path. Same thing with the left-hand path. There's a positive and a negative left-hand path, in my personal opinion. The positive aspect of it is understanding death, is understanding this transformation, is understanding or wanting to understand, I suppose. And some people would say prepping for the afterlife, and understanding the ways of the afterlife, and understanding the deities that are associated with the afterlife, and what all this entails in actuality. So the mysteries are called the mysteries for a reason. And so it's because they're hidden. It's because they're occulted. They're obfuscated by something. And so to me, in the solar world, in the solarized age that we currently live in, the sun is actually obfuscating things. The sun is blinding us from things. So to me, the sun, as an example, is blinding us from the divine feminine, which I know is kind of like a played out sort of title or played out term or whatever, but it's totally true that kind of in the solar world, the feminine takes a back seat, and all of the things that she's related to also takes a back seat. The thing that woman is related to more strongly than men is the mysteries,
right?
Is spirit, is ether. And probably the perfect symbol to describe the mysteries or these different things is with the spiral, because it's never ending. Just like what you said, it's never ending. It's a perpetual curve. It's the curves of life. This is the reason why we chose that shell, as the artwork. Right. And so the spiral goes on and on and on and on. So does, the esoteric side of things. So do the mysteries, so does symbolism. So does your psychology and your spirit. It's an endless well. There's perpetually things that will need to be uncovered and integrated and understood and things like that. The work is never done. In the solarized scientific world, the modern world, people want answers to everything, and they're more comfortable getting fake answers
Yes, they are.
than not. So
No.
so they would rather have an expert, just like with one of the things she mentioned in her breakdown, is that they want the expert to have answers for everything. To me personally, with the mysteries, I've learned to just embrace the mystery now, and in a lot of ways, I think that it's actually about asking better questions than trying to receive specific answers. It's more about questions than answers. It's more about embracing the journey of of all of this stuff versus trying to have this concrete sort of like answer of like, no, this means this, that means that. In these older traditions, I think it was kind of more so understood that, yeah, that means that to you right now. In 10 years, you might have a different opinion about things.
Right. And literally the next day you might have a different opinion, and
Exactly.
that's the beauty of the spiral, I think, because that's all on the table, literally, when you're working with the spiral, in my opinion.
Right.
So,
and you said the word infinite, completely related to that as well.
Yeah.
So I think that this relates to the scarcity versus abundant kind of mentality of the newest tradition and the oldest tradition.
Yeah.
This infinite possibilities, infinite solutions, this infinite sort of like reality that we live within, versus this finite sort of thing versus there's only one answer to this, and that's the answer we're going to give you, and that's the solution that you're going to accept. There's no other way. It's impossible to cure you. There's no cure for your disease. There's a lot of kind of roadblocks and cul-de-sacs with allopathic Western modern medicine.
Yeah.
As you well know.
Yeah, and probably most everybody in here knows, but it's worth repeating because I think it's easy for people to forget. And I think that we forget in the times where we need to remember it most. Mm-hmm. We forget these things when we are in a desperate situation, or when we are kind of like, oh shit, what's going on, or I don't understand, or whatever. We tend to, because fear steps in, that's when we tend to crumble on some of the things that we, maybe have a harder stance on when you're feeling good. And then when you're not feeling so good, things waver. And then your power almost feels like it leaves you a little bit, or that knowledge. How many times I know I've felt this way, but I hear people say this all the time. Well, when I get sick, I forget what to do. It's because you're being disconnected a little bit from your roots, even
right.
when you fall ill to something, because you're realizing your mortality, even even if it's just a common cold or whatever you want to say, something that makes lay in bed for 2 days. You are reminded of your mortality, because it's like you might just not have the will to do anything,
right.
And that's okay. And in that moment, needing to accept that you just don't have the will, and that's okay. But it's just so common that that's what happens. And I think like that's what the scientific tradition relies on, is that people will fall into that fear. They will forget, quote, what to do, and then seek out something outside of themselves. And it's not to say that you might not, you may need to seek help from somebody, and that's okay, or a plant or a remedy or whatever, but to hold that space for yourself and know that, but you are okay. You do know, and you might just have to like really tap in that moment.
Well, the spiral, this isn't, in my personal opinion, the only life you're ever going to live.
Right.
Things go on.
Yeah, right.
So it's just like energy is kind of transformed, not destroyed. And so to me, that's another side of all of this with illness of I think that there was, again, kind of like this Mother Nature doesn't make mistakes mentality, and that there was more faith in that, and that this connection to death being the ultimate transformer was looked at as a beautiful thing. Versus something that we need to be fearful of, right? And so, to me, the spiral speaks to that, the cyclical nature of your soul and of life and of energy in the ether, spirit, all of these different types of things. And so to me, that's a kind of a clear thing as well, where in the scientific world, people don't look at things like that.
Yeah.
So this is it. Just one life, YOLO,
Yep.
this finite sort of existence. So you better make the most of it, and you better this and that, obviously make the most of it, clearly. But when it comes to your attitude on death, being so fearful of it, I think actually is going to create more conflicts, which is why so many cultures around the world, they wanted to teach you how to die, perhaps in a more favorable kind of way. And oftentimes it was your attitude of death can actually hold you back.
Yeah.
So if you're so fearful of leaving this place, that means that you're going to be courted here.
Yep.
And that you're not going to have as favorable, it's been thought of a transition. That what weighs you down here will keep you here versus living a little lighter. So just one way of looking at it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good reminder because that's totally a part of it. Well, I think we got our spiral thoughts out.
We did.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the image up on the screen, which is looks like a woodcut to me, or close to a woodcut of a bloodletting ceremony, or I don't know if you want to call it a ceremony, but a bloodletting situation, let's say. Yes, energy is neither created nor destroyed.
That's right. And hey, what's up, Sarah?
Hi, Sarah.
Exactly right.
And so this bloodletting thing, at first, because I was looking into the heroic tradition quite a bit, actually, for whatever reason, I was very drawn into the origins of the heroic tradition, what's going on with it. Bloodletting is one of the first things you hear about. Galen is a name that will be tossed around, who was the man who basically popularized this practice. Now, as I said earlier in the stream, bloodletting was actually, there was a system to it. They weren't just coming to your house and cutting you open and bleeding you, but they were using the moon and the zodiac as a means to decide on the best times to do the bloodletting for the patient. So they would take the age of the patient into account. They'd also take their ailment into account and then match that to the zodiac, and they would match the age to the moon cycle. Now, in the picture or in this illustration, I love this because this illustrates this really well, because the older man at the table, he's clearly referencing something.
Yeah.
He's working something out. He's got his book, he has his table, he has some sort of divinatory coins or stones or something that he's lining up on his table. I would love to know more about this in particular painting, or this in particular print. And if anyone else out there in the chat knows anything more details about these sorts of things, I'd love to know. But this is something I just wanted to bring up. It's brand new to me in terms of understanding the system behind bloodletting. So it's something that I'm going to be looking into more because it's really interesting to me. As I said, I'm not promoting bloodletting because all the other accounts that I've read about it too, and the way that this was done, was that it was very invasive. It actually brought people even closer to death or brought them to death. And the whole idea behind this was that it was going to shock the body back into health. So doing something so abrasive that the body would come back and you're basically draining yourself of quote unquote bad blood, which one of the arguments that Susan Weed makes for the wise woman tradition against the heroic tradition is that, the blood, the liver, the kidneys, all of these things restore themselves. They have a period of days, a period of time that it takes for the cells of these organs to recreate, to revitalize, and to basically clean itself. And now if you are in a state of health, or maybe if you're not in a state of health, instead of bloodletting someone to get rid of their bad blood, a good idea would probably just to be to bring your terrain into health, to treat your body in a good way so that the organs can work correctly and do what they're built to do, which is heal, which is restore themselves, and which is to bring you back into health. So I think that the concept of what they're trying to do sort of makes sense on some level, but you're skipping that part of the self. You know what I mean? You're just skipping that whole entire thing. You're waiting for the doctor or the physician to get to the house to do this. The other thing that I thought was interesting about the heroic tradition is that there's some people that say that this was basically this tradition helped to put the doctor on some sort of pedestal, because coming over and doing something like this, it showed that the doctor had something to do. There was something they were going to do physically right then and there that you were going to feel and see, and it was a means to begin medical billing and to pay somebody for coming and going, oh my goodness, well, there's a whole bowl of blood by my bedside and I feel quite queasy and I'm going to pass out or whatever. It was kind of the means to be able to implement this.
Interesting.
And I thought that was really freaking interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to me because I'm seeing so much of the overlap with the heroic tradition influencing the scientific tradition that these things just like bled over into one another, because the heroic tradition also uses a lot of things from the wise woman tradition, but turns it on to this weird sort of like harsh treatments and this guilt, shame, you're dirty complex. And the other thing that came to my mind when I was going through this is that the heroic tradition reminds me very much of new agey, cultish, strict religious thought, because of how they would make people feel and because they would be doing such extreme things to them. And that's kind of my take on that. When it comes to this image specifically and the topic of bloodletting,
I think you should continue researching it.
I'm totally going to.
I can tell you have an interest in it based off of the last couple of days of you telling me about bloodletting stuff and being excited about it.
Yeah.
So I think there's something here that you need to uncover or figure out, because I could just tell that you're lighting up with it. And so you should totally look into it more and do a show on it or something, or we could do a show on it.
Yeah, we will, because I know that there's stuff that goes on, and I'm seeing Sarah is talking about leeches. That was another thing. And leeches are also, as she said, they're still used in medicine. And that was another thing that was going on. They used to do a lot of like scarification kind of stuff with the bloodletting as well. And you can look into this, but it was like a little wooden box that they would have, and there was razor blades in it, and they would put it onto the arms, and they would basically like scarify the arms, and then they would bleed you through these through the slits that were caused by this razor box that they had. And another connection to Mercury before we kind of start wrapping things up to the heroic tradition is that they actually did use Mercury a lot of times for as a medicine, and it was they would use calomel, which is basically mercury chloride, which is derived from cinnabar. So there is a whole like alchemical weave to this as well. Alchemists of old, using this. But the whole important thing to remember behind this is what Paracelsus talks about, because he also was somebody or a practitioner that used mercury in a way, but it's all about the dose. Just like when you're working with poison plants and stuff. But these heroic practitioners back in the day would actually be inducing mercury poisoning in people because of that heroic tradition of thinking like, let's really hammer this in. And they would be bringing people into states of mercury poisoning. So those are some of the other accounts that I came across talking about all this stuff. But I couldn't help but think about that connection with the Mercury and the moon.
Right.
And the lunar tradition that you've kind of been bringing together.
Totally.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right on. Awesome.
Yeah, this is a really great one. I'm so glad that we did this.
Totally. I think it was a pretty good overview, actually, for what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we'll be doing other stuff about this down the road. And these are just my current thoughts on, how I break down the symbolic traditions and everything else. So very much still a work in progress, but it's definitely what I'm leaning towards these days.
Yeah, and I can't wait to see what else you come up with from it, or what comes from it, because I think that even just seeing people in the chat really resonating with some of the things you were saying and bringing this stuff together, it does make a lot of sense to me. And now binding all of these things together with the healing traditions, it's pretty cool.
Nice. Right on.
Very, very cool.
Well, thanks again for the invite.
Yeah, of course. And anytime, like, for sure. So I think we got a lot done. And I think that this will be kind of like a a multiple episode
Definitely.
sort of thing as we learn more. And
For sure.
you
This was fun.
Yeah, you come to more conclusions.
You're a great host.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for being a great guest.
You got it.
And thank you to everybody in the chat who stuck around and threw in their 2, 5, 10, 25, 50-cent pieces. You guys always have really great insights and wonderful things to share with us too. So it's awesome that you guys are here. And for anybody who's interested in my updates, we will go through those now if you'd like. So the Full Moon Offering newsletter just came out on Monday on the full Gemini moon. Very excited about these offerings because they've been in the works for a few months now. Shout out to our good friend Christy over at Invoke because she actually inspired me to make these products. And, you know, after I created them, I'm like, you know what? These need to be shared with people, and I'm really excited. So I have my mugwort Dreamtime remedies, and I'm really excited to share this stuff. Mugwort, as most of you know who listen to me, is my strongest plant friend, and I really love working with her. I love sharing and growing her and making medicine with her. And so we've got some Dreamtime smokes that I'm really happy to share because herbal cigarettes and smoke blends are basically how I got into herbalism.
Right.
And Mario was the catalyst for that because it was Mario who actually was researching an herb called Damiana, which a lot of people who know Damiana know that it's a very smokable herb. And so he was on a mission to find Damiana. He invited me to an herb shop in Portland. We went, and the rest is history. And here we still are. So I've got herbal smokes for you. I have a fresh mugwort, dream oil, and also mugwort smudges.
Also, just want to say your newsletter was just released.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have the link in the description if we haven't said it yet.
Oh, yeah.
And also the link is in your description. I don't know if you updated that.
I did update that.
Yeah. So I encourage people to sign up for her newsletter because it is the best way to understand just your latest offerings with everything.
Yeah. Thanks, babe. Because in this newsletter, too, I share the process of how to roll your own herbal cigarettes. Because I think it's really fun. There's kind of a learning curve, so don't get frustrated if you try. You really do. It takes some patience to do it, but once you find your roll, you're good to go. And yes, I have also a couple blog posts that are going to be coming out this week talking about herbal cigarettes and herbal smoke blends and my experience with them because I actually have quite a bit of experience with it. So really happy to share this with everybody. Up on the screen, you'll see my current menu. So the Dreamtime smokes are selling fast. I only have 2 packs left. So they come as a 4-pack, and they are $11 for a 4-pack. So you can head over to my store if you want to learn more about those or purchase them. The fresh mugwort dream oil and the mugwort smudge, all very beautiful, made with mugwort that was grown with love and harvested here with love. And then I've got 1 bar of my oat and honey soap left. I just also released some more comfrey nettle and pine shampoo bars, of which I have about 6 left. So yeah, you can head to my store if you want to get some of that stuff for yourself or someone you love. And the next Full Moon Offering newsletter will be coming out on December 26th. That will be another fun one. I've got some new products up my sleeve that I'm really happy to share. Next week is a to be announced with the Healing Home. So we'll be back with you guys on December 5th at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Same place, the Healing Home.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention that I got a lot out of this conversation with David Matheson. So I talked to Chance and David on Sunday, but the conversation premiered yesterday. And he's all about Ophiuchus, the 13th sign.
There's that 13 weave.
And I've been interested in Ophiuchus lately. And so the fact that I was able to have a conversation with him, I thought it was very interesting. There are some main, I guess, takeaways from it that I greatly appreciate. And we don't see everything eye to eye, to be honest. But I can translate some of what he's saying into my worldview or perspective. And actually, a lot of what he's saying completely mirrors what I already know about Ophiuchus. And so anyways, check that out if you guys are interested. I thought it was an awesome conversation. I hope to talk to him again. And it looks as though there's going to be some other Ophiuchus content coming down the road. So give that a go. And then also, I just talked to Topher from BioCharisma, And that conversation was just released too. So if you guys are interested in that, check out topherhq.com, go to his podcast section, and you can listen to that. It was a fun conversation. Topher has a lot of great insights about so many different things. So it was cool that we were finally able to get together and have that chat. And for everything else, symbolicstudies.com. Once again, I'm available for tarot readings. I've got study packets, things like that. But I think that'll do it.
I think that will do it. And let's bring us back here. Alrighty, y'all. Well, thank you so much for hanging in there with us. Thanks for being here and being awesome. Thank you, Mario, again. I love you so much. And your insights just continuously blow my mind. And I'm going to get choked up, but yeah, you always bring it. So thank you for all you do and all your sharing with everybody.
Of course. Love you too.
Yeah, to be able
fun.
It was fun. And to be able to bring all this stuff together, it's really cool because it's like when worlds collide. I feel like our worlds and our studies always just collide so well together.
This was a good example.
This is a really good example. And I was going to show...
Oh, yeah, you should.
I'll just show real quick before we go. So I brought in the remedies today, which I don't normally do. I normally just announce them or show the photos, but just wanted to show the mugwort smudge. Kind of hard to see in the light. Very silvery, as you can see. But the cool thing about this mugwort is I harvested it like right when it was budding. So not only are they really beautiful aesthetically, but when the mugwort is budding, but right before the flowers open is when the fragrance is the strongest. And it's really cool. So I harvested it in the morning right before, at that budding stage. And it really, really, really brings out a really great scent. And the smoke on these smudges are really nice as well. So they smolder really well. And then Mario's holding up the Dreamtime smokes. They come in a really nice reusable glass like doob tube, I guess, which is closed with the cork. I'm really excited about it. I also sealed each cigarette with mugwort flower essence that I made this summer, which I was really happy to do that with. So they're not bound with my saliva. They're bound with mugwort flower essences, which is really fun and really cool and very potent. So just bringing more mugworty energy for y'all. And then lastly, we have the fresh mugwort dream oil, which is essentially my fresh mugwort anointing oil. But this one is specifically just made and created with the intention for dreaming and allowing you to utilize mugwort in a different sort of way in terms of tapping into the crone wisdom and allowing mugwort to kind of like strip the wool from your subconscious. Most of the time when you hear about mugwort, the first thing that comes out is lucid dreams, which it will do. But I think mugwort wants you to look at her as a grandmother that will sit at your bedside and ask you the important questions that need to be asked in order for you to get into your own void and to find your own spiral. And that is what I find mugwort to be very perfect for, because she typically in dreams will bring up things that you may have thought that you already worked past that. You already kind of did this. And then all of a sudden she pulls up this one thing from the subconscious and goes, nope, there's this one little thing that you might want to look at. Right. And I think that looking at mugwort from that perspective, as opposed to it just taking you to the lucid dream or whatever, which is very important, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah. There's a deeper medicine within mugwort when you really start to tap into her and you really listen to why she wants people to use her in the dream realm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
So anyway,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So thanks, guys. As always, we'll see you next week. Until then, take care and have a lovely rest of your week and evening.
All right, guys. Take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.